In the fog-laden streets of Victorian London, a brilliant inventor's death by inexplicable means, a body melted, as if by an internal furnace, draws Sherlock Holmes into a labyrinth of scientific ambition and hidden truths. With Dr. Watson by his side, Holmes unravels a mystery tied to a revolutionary device, a secret society, and a betrayal that burns hotter than any flame. Chapter 1. The Urgent Summons. The fire in the grate at 221 B. Baker Street crackled with a restless energy, mirroring the atmosphere within the room. It was a damp October evening in 1887, and the fog outside clung to London like a conspirator's cloak. Sherlock Holmes sat in his armchair, his long fingers steepled, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if it held the secrets of the cosmos. I, Dr. John Watson, occupied the opposite chair, attempting to read the evening paper, though my attention was repeatedly drawn to Holmes's peculiar silence, a silence that often heralded the arrival of a new case. The clock had just struck 7 when Mrs. Hudson's knock interrupted the stillness. "A telegram, Mr. Holmes," she announced, handing over a slip of paper before retreating with her usual blend of patience and exasperation. Holmes's eyes flicked to the telegram, and in a single fluid motion he plucked it from the table. His brows arched slightly as he read aloud. "'Tis, Mr. Holmes, I beseech your aid. My husband, Elias Hargrove, is dead, murdered in a manner most unnatural. Police baffled. Come to Hargrove Manor, Kensington, at once. Eliza Hargrove." "Unnatural, you say?" I ventured, leaning forward. "That sits a curious choice of words." "Indeed, Watson," Holmes replied, his voice sharp with intrigue. "The term unnatural suggests something beyond the ordinary brutality of murder. A puzzle, perhaps, that defies the mundane mechanisms of violence." He sprang to his feet, his lean frame a coiled spring of purpose. "Pack your revolver, Watson. We depart for Kensington within the hour." The hansom cab rattled through London's fog-choked streets, the gaslights casting ghostly halos. Holmes sat beside me, his profile etched against the window, lost in thought. I knew better than to disturb him when his mind was thus engaged, but curiosity gnawed at me. Elias Hargrove was a name I vaguely recalled, a founder and inventor of some renown, whose company, Hargrove Industries, had lately been the talk of scientific circles. Rumors spoke of a revolutionary device, though its nature remained shrouded in secrecy. Hargrove Manor loomed at the end of a tree-lined drive, its Gothic spires piercing the mist. As we alighted, the heavy oak door swung open, revealing a woman in widow's black, her face pale but composed. Mrs. Eliza Hargrove was younger than I expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with sharp green eyes that betrayed both grief and determination. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Thank you for coming so swiftly. My husband, he was found this morning in his workshop. The police say it's impossible, but I know it was murder." Holmes's gaze narrowed, his interest piqued. "Describe the impossibility, Mrs. Hargrove." She hesitated, as if the words themselves were too horrific to utter. "Elias was melted. His body, it was reduced to a slag-like mass, as if burned from within, yet the workshop was locked, and there was no fire, no heat source, nothing to explain it." I felt a chill that had little to do with the damp air. Holmes, however, merely nodded, as if such an outlandish description were a daily occurrence. Fascinating, he murmured. We shall see the body at once, if you please. As Mrs. Hargrove led us through the manor's dimly lit corridors, I caught the glint of excitement in Holmes's eyes, the thrill of a mystery that promised to test even his prodigious intellect. Little did we know, the molten death of Elias Hargrove was but the first spark in a conflagration of secrets that would threaten to consume us all. What did you think of this chilling opening to the founder's molten mystery? Where are you listening this from? London's foggy streets, a cozy cafe, or somewhere far more exotic? Drop your location in the comments and subscribe to the channel for the next thrilling chapter of Sherlock Holmes's adventure. Chapter 2. The Widow's Tale. The drawing-room of Hargrove Manor was a study in opulence tempered by grief. Heavy velvet curtains framed tall windows through which the fog pressed like an uninvited guest. Mrs. Eliza Hargrove sat rigidly on a brocade settee, her hands clasped tightly, as Sherlock Holmes paced before the fireplace. I stood near the door, notebook in hand, ready to record the details that would inevitably prove crucial. Holmes fixed his piercing gaze upon our hostess, Mrs. Hargrove. He began, his tone measured yet commanding. Begin at the beginning. Omit nothing, however trivial it may seem. She drew a steadying breath. Elias was a visionary, Mr. Holmes. His work at Hargrove Industries consumed him. For months he spoke of little else but his molten core, a device he claimed would revolutionize energy, perhaps the world itself. He was secretive, even with me, but I knew it involved principles beyond ordinary engineering. Beyond engineering? Holmes interjected, his eyes narrowing. Elaborate. He spoke of ancient texts, alchemical theories, ideas he sits uncovered in rare manuscripts. I thought it fanciful, but he was adamant they held scientific merit. He worked alone in his workshop, a fortified room in the West Wing, locked from within. Only he had the key. I glanced at Holmes, expecting a dismissive remark about alchemy, but he merely nodded. Continue. The events of yesterday. Yesterday morning, she said, her voice faltering, I found the workshop door still locked. Elias hadn't emerged for breakfast, which wasn't unusual when he was engrossed. I called through the door, but there was no reply. I grew uneasy and summoned our butler, Mr. Grayson, to break it open. Inside, we found her composure cracked, and she pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Take your time, I said gently, though Holmes's impatient glance suggested otherwise. It was Elias, but not Elias. His body was on the floor, reduced to a grotesque molten mass, as if he'd been subjected to unimaginable heat. Yet the room was untouched. No scorch marks, no ash, no sign of fire. The police arrived, but they're at a loss. Inspector Lestrade called it an act of God, but I know better. Someone killed my husband. Holmes ceased pacing, his silhouette stark against the firelight. The workshop, describe its contents. A workbench, tools, his papers, and the molten core itself, a complex apparatus of brass and iron, with a glass chamber at its center. It was cold, inert, when we found him. The police examined it, but found nothing amiss. Suspects, Mrs. Hargrove. Holmes pressed. Who stood to gain from your husband Set's death? She hesitated. His business partner, Mr. Victor Crane, was envious of Elias's genius. They argued often over the company's direction. Then there's Dr. Margaret Poole, a chemist Elias consulted. She was frustrated by his secrecy. And our son Thomas. He and Elias were estranged. Thomas resented his father's obsession with work, but surely none of them could commit such an act. Holmes' lips twitched in a faint smile, as if her certainty amused him. One final question. Did your husband have enemies outside the family or company? None that I know, she replied, but a flicker of doubt crossed her face. Though he mentioned a sea-shadowed figure watching the manor at night. He dismissed it as nerves, but I saw fear in his eyes. Holmes clapped his hands together, startling me. Excellent, Watson. We shall inspect the workshop at first light. Mrs. Hargrove, ensure no one enters that room until we return. The game, as they say, is afoot. As we left the drawing room, the weight of Mrs. Hargrove's words settled over me. A man melted in a locked room, a device of untold power, and a shadowy watcher in the fog. This was no ordinary case, and I sensed Holmes relished the challenge as much as I dreaded its implications. Chapter 3. Arrival at Hargrove Manor. The dawn broke over Kensington with a sullen grey light, the fog of the previous night lingering like a shroud over Hargrove Manor. Our hansom cab rattled to a stop before the estate's iron gates, which creaked ominously as a liveried footman ushered us through. The manor itself was a brooding edifice of weathered stone, its Gothic arches and gargoyle-adorned turrets giving it the air of a medieval fortress rather than a modern residence. Ivy clung to its walls, as if nature itself sought to conceal the secrets within. I adjusted my coat against the morning chill, while Sherlock Holmes, ever impervious to discomfort, surveyed the grounds with a hawk-like intensity. "Observe, Watson," he remarked, pointing to the gravel path leading to the manor steps entrance. The tracks of multiple carriages, recent given the clarity of the ruts, yet Mrs. Hargrove mentioned no visitors yesterday. Curious. I nodded, though the significance eluded me. Holmes's mind was already racing ahead, piecing together fragments invisible to my untrained eye. We were met at the door by Mrs. Eliza Hargrove, her face pale but resolute, her black mourning dress a stark contrast to the opulent foyer. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and portraits of stern-faced Hargroves lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow us as we proceeded. "Thank you for returning so promptly, Mr. Holmes," she said, leading us through a labyrinth of corridors. "The police have cordoned off the workshop, but they made no progress. They mutter about accidents or divine judgment, but I trust you still see what they cannot." Holmes' lips curled in a faint, sardonic smile. "The police are rarely equipped for matters that defy their limited imaginations. Lead on, Mrs. Hargrove." The west wing of the manor grew increasingly austere as we approached the workshop. Gone were the luxurious trappings, replaced by bare stone walls and the faint hum of machinery that seemed to vibrate through the floor. The air carried a metallic tang, mingled with something acrid I couldn't place. At the end of a long hallway stood a heavy iron door, its surface scored with scratches as if it had withstood an assault. A stout padlock hung from a reinforced bolt, and a police constable stood guard, his expression a mix of boredom and unease. "Inspector Lestrade sitist's orders," the constable said gruffly. "No one sits to enter without his say-so." Holmes produced a letter from his pocket bearing Lestrade's scrawled signature. "I believe this will suffice," he said, his tone brooking no argument. The constable, after a cursory glance, stepped aside, and Mrs. Hargrove produced a key from a chain around her neck. The lock yielded with a groan, and the door swung inward, revealing a chamber that seemed to belong to another world. The workshop was vast, its high ceiling supported by iron beams, and its walls lined with shelves of tools, blueprints and curious contraptions. Gas lamps cast flickering shadows, illuminating a central workbench dominated by an extraordinary device. The molten core, as Mrs. Hargrove had called it, was a marvel of engineering, a spherical apparatus of polished brass and iron, studded with valves and gauges, with a glass chamber at its heart that glowed faintly, though it was clearly inactive. Pipes snaked from its base, connecting to a series of smaller mechanisms, and the air around it seemed to shimmer with latent energy. But it was not the device that drew my attention. In the center of the room, marked by a chalk outline, lay the spot where Elias Hargrove had met his end. The floor was pristine, save for a faint, irregular stain, dark and glistening, as if the stone itself had absorbed some residue of the horror. I shuddered, recalling Mrs. Hargrove's description of a body melted from within. Holmes, however, was already at work. He dropped to his knees, his magnifying glass in hand, examining the floor with the precision of a jeweler. "No scorch marks, no ash," he muttered, "yet the stain suggests extreme heat, localized to the victim. Most peculiar." He rose and approached the molten core, his fingers tracing its contours without touching. "This device, did your husband ever demonstrate its function, Mrs. Hargrove?" "Only once," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "He activated it briefly, and the glass chamber glowed with a light unlike any I've seen, neither fire nor electricity, but something otherworldly. He said it harnessed principles lost to time, but he shut it down quickly, fearing its power." Holmes' eyes gleamed with interest. "And the room was locked from within, you say? No other entrances?" "None," she confirmed. "The windows are barred, and the walls are solid stone. The key was found in Elias Skip's pocket, or what remained of it." I exchanged a glance with Holmes, my mind grappling with the impossibility. A man melted in a locked room, with no trace of fire or external heat. Even Holmes's prodigious intellect seemed momentarily stilled by the enigma. He turned to the workbench, rifling through papers covered in cryptic diagrams and annotations. "These notes," he said, holding up a sheet inscribed with symbols that resembled no language I knew. "They suggest a blend of chemistry and something else. Watson, have you ever encountered alchemical sigils in your medical studies?" "Never," I admitted. "But they look ancient, almost occult." "Precisely," Holmes said, pocketing the paper. "Mrs. Hargrove, I shall need to speak with your son Thomas and Mr. Crane, the business partner, as soon as possible. Their perspectives may illuminate matters." "They set both here," she said. "Thomas has been distant, but he sets in his rooms. Mr. Crane arrived this morning, ostensibly to oversee the company's set affairs in Elias Skip's absence." "Excellent," Holmes said, his tone betraying a hint of anticipation. "Watson, prepare yourself. This manor holds more than grief. It harbors deception. We shall uncover it, layer by molten layer." As we left the workshop, the iron door clanging shut behind us, I felt the weight of the mystery settle deeper. The molten core loomed in my mind, its silent presence a promise of revelations yet to come, and I knew Holmes was already weaving the threads of this impossible crime into a tapestry only he could fully comprehend. Chapter 4. The Molten Corpse. The air in Hargrove Manor's workshop seemed to thicken as Sherlock Holmes and I stood over the chalk outline marking the spot where Elias Hargrove had perished. The gas lamps cast long, wavering shadows across the stone floor, and the molten core device loomed silently behind us, its brass and glass form, a mute witness to the horror that had unfolded. Mrs. Hargrove had withdrawn to summon her son and Mr. Crane, leaving us alone with the constable, who lingered uneasily by the door, his eyes darting to the stain within the chalk outline, a dark, glistening patch that seemed to defy natural explanation. Holmes knelt beside the stain, his magnifying glass glinting as he examined it with meticulous care. "Remarkable, Watson," he murmured, his voice low but vibrant with fascination. "The residue is neither ash nor soot, nor the byproduct of any conventional combustion. It has a metallic sheen, almost crystalline in structure. Have you ever seen such a thing in your medical practice?" I crouched beside him, peering at the stain. It was unlike anything I'd encountered in my years as a doctor or a soldier. The floor was unmarred by scorch marks, yet the stain suggested an intense localized heat, enough to reduce a man to slag, as Mrs. Hargrove had described. "It's as if the body itself became a crucible," I said, struggling to reconcile the evidence with reason. But how could such heat originate within a man, with no external source? Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile, his mind clearly racing ahead. "A question worthy of pursuit. Observe the distribution of the residue concentrated here, where the torso would have lain, with lesser traces radiating outward. The extremities were less affected, suggesting a heat source centralized in the body's core." He rose, brushing dust from his trousers, and turned his attention to the surrounding area. No signs of forced entry, no burns on the walls or ceiling. The windows, as Mrs. Hargrove noted, are barred and intact. I followed his gaze to the workshop's windows, high and narrow, their iron bars rusted but unyielding. The room was a fortress, designed to protect its secrets, and yet it had failed to protect its master. "Holmes," I ventured, "could this be some chemical reaction? A poison, perhaps, that mimics the effects of heat?" "A plausible hypothesis, Watson," he replied, circling the molten core device. "But poisons leave traces, odors, discoloration, or systemic symptoms observable in autopsy. Mrs. Hargrove's description suggests no such signs, only this extraordinary dissolution." He paused, his fingers hovering over the device's glass chamber, which remained dark and lifeless. "This apparatus, the molten core, it is the key. Its purpose, its mechanism, must hold the answer to this impossibility." I studied the device more closely. It was a marvel of engineering, its brass fittings polished to a mirror sheen, its pipes and valves arranged with almost artistic precision. The central glass chamber, roughly the size of a man's head, was etched with faint, intricate patterns, symbols that echoed those on the papers Holmes had pocketed earlier. "It looks like something out of a Jules Verne novel," I remarked. "Could it have malfunctioned, releasing some energy that caused this?" Holmes shook his head. "Unlikely. Mrs. Hargrove said it was cold when the body was found. Yet we must not rule out its involvement." He turned abruptly to the workbench, sifting through a pile of tools and blueprints. Among them, he found a small leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with Hargrove's meticulous handwriting and diagrams. "Elias Hargrove was no mere tinkerer," Holmes said, scanning the pages. "These notes reference transmutation of matter and the primal fire. Alchemical nonsense, perhaps, but married to modern metallurgy, a dangerous combination." Before I could respond, the workshop door creaked open, admitting Mrs. Hargrove, followed by two men. The first was young, perhaps in his mid-twenties, with a sullen expression and dark circles under his eyes, Thomas Hargrove, the estranged son. His dishevelled attire and hunched posture suggested a man wrestling with grief or guilt. The second was older, broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed beard and a tailored suit, Victor Crane, the business partner. His eyes flicked to the molten core, then to Holmes, with a guarded intensity. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Mrs. Hargrove said, her voice strained. "This is my son, Thomas, and Mr. Victor Crane, Elias Sist's partner in Hargrove Industries." Holmes wasted no time. "Mr. Hargrove, when did you last see your father?" Thomas shifted uncomfortably, his gaze fixed on the floor. "2 days ago. We argued. He was obsessed with that damned machine, neglecting everything else. Mother, me, the company. I told him it would ruin us all." His voice cracked, but whether from sorrow or something darker, I couldn't tell. "And you, Mr. Crane?" Holmes' tone was sharp, probing. Crane met Holmes' gaze with a practiced calm. "I saw Elias 3 days ago at the company offices. We discussed the molten core SIP's potential, a limitless energy source, if he could perfect it. He was secretive, even with me, but I respected his genius. His death is a tragedy for us all." Holmes's eyes narrowed, as if detecting a false note in Cranesip's polished demeanor. "And neither of you entered this workshop yesterday?" Both men shook their heads, though Thomas Sitt's denial was hesitant, his fingers twitching nervously. Mrs. Hargrove interjected. "The police confirmed the door was locked from within. Only Elias had the key." Holmes nodded, though his expression suggested he placed little faith in police confirmations. "Very well, Watson, we shall return to Baker Street to consider this further. Mrs. Hargrove, ensure this room remains undisturbed." Mr. Hargrove, "Mr. Crane, I shall require your presence for further questioning tomorrow." As we left the workshop, the constable locking the door behind us, I felt the weight of the mystery deepen. The molten corpse, the impenetrable room, the cryptic device. It was a puzzle that defied logic, yet Holmes' calm assurance gave me hope. As we stepped into the fog-laden air of Kensington, I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure lingering near the manor's gates, vanishing before I could point it out. Holmes, however, was already striding toward our cab, his mind no doubt dissecting the clues we'd uncovered, and I hurried to keep pace, eager for the revelations that lay ahead. Chapter 5. Suspects in the Shadows. The fog had thickened as we returned to Hargrove Manor the following morning, its damp tendrils curling around the estate like the fingers of some spectral hand. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and coal smoke, a fitting backdrop for the grim task ahead. Sherlock Holmes strode purposefully beside me, his greatcoat flapping as he surveyed the manor's grounds with a predator's focus. I clutched my notebook, my mind still reeling from the impossibility of Elias Hargrove's molten demise, and braced myself for the interviews Holmes had insisted upon. Inside, the manor's opulent drawing-room felt colder than the day before, as if the weight of tragedy had seeped into its very walls. Mrs. Hargrove awaited us, her composure fraying at the edges, her green eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. Beside her stood Thomas Hargrove, slouched in a chair, his sullen demeanour unchanged, and Victor Crane, who leaned against the mantelpiece with an air of calculated ease. A third figure, introduced as Dr. Margaret Poole, the chemist Elias had consulted, sat primly on a settee. She was a woman of middle years, her sharp features framed by tightly pinned hair, her expression one of guarded curiosity. Holmes wasted no time on pleasantries. "Let us dispense with formalities," he said, his voice cutting through the room-sipped tension like a scalpel. "Each of you had motive, opportunity, or both, to wish Elias Hargrove dead. I require candor, and I shall know if you withhold it." Thomas flinched, his hands twisting in his lap. "You think I stood kill my own father?" he muttered, his voice thick with resentment. "He was a tyrant, yes, but I didn't hate him enough for that." Holmes' Depser's eyes gleamed, as if the boy's defensiveness were a clue in itself. "Your estrangement is well documented, Mr. Hargrove. You argued 2 days before his death over his obsession with the molten core. What precisely did you say?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "I told him he was ruining us. The company's funds were bleeding into that machine, and he ignored Mother's pleas to stop. I said he'd burn himself out. Or worse, I didn't mean it literally." His voice rose, cracking on the final word. I jotted down his words, noting the raw emotion. Holmes, however, turned to Victor Crane, whose polished demeanor remained unruffled. "Mr. Crane, you stand to gain control of Hargrove Industries, do you not? Elias's secrecy about the molten core frustrated you. Did it drive you to eliminate the obstacle?" Crane's smile was thin, almost reptilian. "Mr. Holmes, I admired Elias. Even if we disagreed, his death leaves the company in chaos, hardly to my advantage. As for the molten core, I trusted Elias to perfect it. My role was to secure investors, not to meddle in his genius." Holmes' gaze lingered, as if weighing the truth of Crane's words. "And yet you visited the manor 3 days ago, after a heated argument at the company offices. What was discussed?" "A business matter," Crane said smoothly. "Elias wanted to delay the device's unveiling, claiming it wasn't ready. I urged haste. Investors grow impatient. We parted on tense terms, but murder, preposterous." I glanced at Holmes, expecting a retort, but he pivoted to Dr. Poole, who had remained silent, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Dr. Poole, you collaborated with Elias on the chemical components of the molten core. His secrecy must have rankled a scientist of your caliber." Dr. Poole's eyes narrowed, but her voice was steady. "Elias was maddeningly cryptic. He shared only fragments of his research, expecting me to fill in the gaps. I provided compounds he requested, rare earths, volatile catalysts, but he never revealed their purpose. I was frustrated, not vengeful." Holmes paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "And what of these compounds? Could any, alone or in combination, produce the effect we observed, a body reduced to slag without external heat?" Dr. Poole hesitated, her scientific mind grappling with the question. "Theoretically, certain exothermic reactions could generate intense localized heat, but they'd require a delivery mechanism, ingestion, injection, or inhalation. I saw no such evidence in Elias's workshop, and I'd stake my reputation on it." Holmes nodded, though his expression suggested he was far from satisfied. "Mrs. Hargrove, you mentioned a seditious figure your husband saw watching the manor. Have any of you observed similar intrusions?" Mrs. Hargrove shook her head, but Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "I might have seen someone," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "A week ago near the stables at dusk, a man in a dark cloak watching the house. I thought it was a vagrant and paid it no mind." Crane and Dr. Poole exchanged glances, but both denied seeing anything unusual. Holmes' eyes flickered with interest, though he said nothing. Instead, he turned to the fireplace, examining a small brass ornament, a miniature replica of the molten core. its glass center catching the firelight. "Curious," he murmured, almost to himself. "A decorative trinket, yet it mirrors the device precisely. Mrs. Hargrove, who crafted this?" "Elias made it," she replied. "A prototype, he called it, though it sits merely ornamental. He kept it here as a reminder of his vision." Holmes pocketed the ornament with a deft movement, ignoring Mrs. Hargrove's startled look. "I shall borrow this with your permission. Watson, we have heard enough for now. I require time to reflect." As we left the drawing room, the suspects' voices faded into a tense murmur behind us. I followed Holmes through the manor's corridors, my mind swirling with questions. Thomas's bitterness, Crane's slick composure, Dr. Poole's guarded precision. Each held a piece of the puzzle, yet none fit the grotesque reality of Elias's death, and the shadowed figure, lingering in the fog, added a new layer of menace. "Holmes," I said as we stepped into the Manorcept's courtyard, "do you suspect one of them?" He paused, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the fog obscured the city. "Suspicion, Watson, is premature without data. But I observe this. Each has a motive, and each conceals something. The molten core is the fulcrum of this mystery, and I intend to uncover its secrets before our shadowed watcher strikes again." The chill of his words lingered as we boarded our cab, the manor receding into the mist behind us. I sensed we were on the cusp of revelations that would test even Holmes's unparalleled mind, and I braced myself for the dangers lurking in the shadows of this molten enigma. Chapter 6. The Secret Prototype. The afternoon sun pierced the fog outside 221B Baker Street, casting elongated shadows across the cluttered sitting room where Sherlock Holmes and I had retreated to ponder the enigmas of Hargrove Manor. Holmes lounged in his armchair, his violin tucked under his chin, drawing forth a melancholic melody that seemed to echo the molten mystery we pursued. I sat at the desk, poring over my notes from the interrogations, the words of Thomas Hargrove, Victor Crane, and Dr. Margaret Poole swirling in my mind like suspects in a crowded alibi. Holmes set down his violin abruptly, his eyes snapping open with that familiar glint of revelation. "Watson, the molten core is no mere invention. It is a Pandora's box of secrets. We must return to the workshop at once. There is something we overlooked, a detail hidden in plain sight." I raised an eyebrow, accustomed to his sudden shifts, but no less intrigued. "Overlooked? You examined every inch of that room, Holmes. What could possibly have escaped your notice?" He sprang to his feet, grabbing his coat and hat. "Not escaped, Watson. Deliberately concealed. Elias Hargrove was a man of layers, his device likewise. Come, the cab awaits." The journey back to Kensington was swift, the city's bustle giving way to the manor's solemn quietude. Mrs. Hargrove met us at the door, her face etched with a mix of hope and exhaustion. "Mr. Holmes, have you made progress?" "The police have been no help, merely sealing the workshop and muttering about accidents." "Progress is imminent," Holmes replied cryptically, striding toward the west wing. The constable, recognizing us, unlocked the iron door without protest, and we stepped once more into the chamber of horrors. The molten core dominated the space, its brass surfaces reflecting the gaslight in a mocking gleam. Holmes approached it directly, his magnifying glass in hand, inspecting the base where pipes converged into a concealed compartment. "Observe, Watson," he said, his voice low with concentration. "These fittings are not uniform. Here, a seam disguised as ornamentation. With deft fingers, he twisted a valve, and a soft click echoed through the room. A panel slid open, revealing a hidden drawer within the device's pedestal. Inside lay a smaller, more intricate apparatus, a prototype, compact and exquisitely crafted. Its glass chamber no larger than a fist, etched with the same arcane symbols we'd seen before. I leaned closer, marveling at the craftsmanship. A secret prototype, but why hide it within the larger machine? Holmes extracted the device carefully, holding it to the light, to protect it, or perhaps to test it in isolation. This is the heart of the molten core, Watson, a miniaturized version, likely the source of Hargrove's primal fire. Note the residue within the chamber, a faint iridescent powder similar to the stain on the floor. Mrs. Hargrove, who had followed us silently, gasped. Elias never mentioned a prototype. He guarded the molten core jealously, but this, it must have been his breakthrough. Breakthrough or curse, Holmes murmured, examining the prototype's mechanisms. These valves suggest a controlled release of energy. But if mishandled, the reaction could be catastrophic. Doctor, Poole spoke of volatile catalysts. Imagine one ingested or introduced surreptitiously, triggering an internal conflagration. I shuddered at the implication. You mean Hargrove was poisoned with his own invention? But how? The room was locked, and he was alone. Holmes' his eyes narrowed.
Alone, yes, but perhaps not unassailed. We must analyze this powder. Watson, fetch my chemical kit from the cab. I always carry it for such contingencies.
As I retrieved the kit, Holmes cleared a space on the workbench, setting the prototype down with reverence. Upon my return, he sprinkled a pinch of the iridescent powder into a test tube, adding reagents with precise drops. The mixture fizzed, turning a vivid blue before settling into a crystalline precipitate. Fascinating, he said. This is no ordinary compound. It contains elements of phosphorus and rare earths, capable of spontaneous combustion under specific conditions, say when exposed to bodily fluids or enzymes. Mrs. Hargrove, Sitzkan flew to her mouth. Giuseppe saying someone could have slipped this into his food or drink. Precisely, Holmes confirmed. But the dosage would need to be exact, and the delivery timed perfectly. The locked room suggests a delayed reaction, or perhaps a more ingenious method. He pocketed a sample of the powder, then turned his attention to the prototype's engravings. These symbols, alchemical, as I suspected, Hargrove drew from forbidden knowledge, blending science with the occult. Watson, recall the diary Mrs. Hargrove mentioned. We must locate it. A search of the workshop yielded nothing at first, but Holmes' keen eye spotted a loose floorboard near the workbench. Prying it up, we discovered a hidden compartment containing a leather-bound diary, its pages filled with Hargrove's hurried script. Holmes flipped through it, his brow furrowing. Entries on experiments, failures, and a breakthrough 6 months ago. Listen to this. The prototype succeeds beyond dreams, the primal fire harnessed, energy unlimited. But the society warns of dangers. They covet my secret, must hide it, even from Eliza. The society, I echoed. What society? Holmes closed the diary with a snap. An alchemical brotherhood perhaps, lurking in London Sep's underbelly. Hargrove mentions, see the Order of the Eternal Flame, seed a group he joined in his youth, but later distanced himself from. They may have seen his invention as a threat or a prize. Mrs. Hargrove shook her head in disbelief. Elias spoke of no such order. He was a rational man, not given to secret societies. Rational men often harbour irrational secrets, Holmes replied gently. This prototype promises unlimited energy, Watson, power to light cities or destroy them. In the wrong hands, it could melt more than metal. As we prepared to leave, the constable burst into the room, his face ashen. Mr. Holmes, sir, a message from Inspector Lestrade. There's since been another incident at the company foundry. A worker found melted, just like Mr. Hargrove. Holmes' expression hardened, the thrill of discovery giving way to urgency. The game escalates. Watson, we must hasten to the foundry. This secret prototype holds deadly secrets indeed, and our culprit grows bold. We departed Hargrove Manor under a gathering storm, the prototype and diary secured in Holmes's satchel. The fog seemed denser, more oppressive, as if conspiring to hide the truths we sought. I glanced back at the manor, wondering how many more shadows the molten core would cast before we unravelled its molten mystery. Chapter 7. A Nighttime Intrusion. The streets of London were shrouded in a dense fog as our cab rattled back from Hargrove Manor toward Baker Street. The revelation of the secret prototype and Elias Hargrove's diary had ignited a fire in Sherlock Holmes's eyes, a blaze of intellectual fervour that I knew all too well. He clutched the satchel containing the prototype and diary tightly, his mind doubtless dissecting the new clues like a surgeon with a scalpel. I, for my part, felt a growing unease. The molten deaths, the hidden society, the shadowed figure, all pointed to a conspiracy that extended far beyond the manor's walls. We arrived at 221B as dusk fell, the gas lamps flickering to life along the street. Mrs. Hudson greeted us with her customary concern. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, you look half frozen. Iced ever pot of tea brewing and supper warming." "Excellent, Mrs. Hudson," Holmes replied absently, ascending the stairs 2 at a time. "No disturbances tonight. We have much to ponder." In our sitting room, Holmes placed the prototype on the table, its miniature form casting eerie shadows in the firelight. He opened the diary, his fingers tracing the entries. "The Order of the Eternal Flame," he mused, "a relic of alchemical pursuits thought defunct since the Enlightenment. Hargrove's notes suggest they reformed in secret, drawn to his invention like moths to a flame. But why kill him? To steal the prototype, or to silence him?" I poured us each a brandy, the warmth a welcome counter to the chill seeping through the windows, and the foundry incident. Another victim melted, surely connected. "Undoubtedly," Holmes said, leaning back in his chair. "The worker may have stumbled upon something or been a test subject. We must visit the foundry at dawn. For now, analyze this powder further." He gestured to his chemical apparatus, where he'd begun a more thorough examination of the iridescent residue. Hours passed in focused silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional clink of glassware. Midnight approached, and I suggested retiring, but Holmes waved me off. "Sleep if you must, Watson. My mind requires no such respite." Reluctantly, I ascended to my room, revolver at the ready, a habit born of too many perilous cases. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by visions of molten forms and shadowy pursuers. It was perhaps 2 in the morning when a faint noise roused me, a soft creak, like a floorboard protesting under weight. I sat up, heart pounding, and grasped my revolver. The sound came again, closer now, from the landing outside my door. Slipping from bed, I crept to the door and listened. Silence, then a muffled thud from below, the sitting room. "Holmes," I whispered urgently, descending the stairs. The door to our rooms was ajar, a sliver of moonlight revealing a dark figure silhouetted against the window, rifling through Holmes's desk. The intruder froze as I entered, his face obscured by a mask, but his build suggested a man of agility and strength. In his hand gleamed a vial, perhaps poison, or worse. "Stop," I commanded, raising my revolver. The figure whirled, hurling a chair in my direction. I dodged, firing a shot that splintered the woodwork. The intruder bolted for the window, shattering the glass with a booted foot and leaping into the night. "Watson!" Holmes emerged from his bedroom, alerted by the commotion. The prototype. A quick glance confirmed the satchel was undisturbed, but the diary lay open on the table, pages rifled. "He sought information, not the device," Holmes said, his voice laced with excitement, quickly after him. We dashed into the street, the fog a swirling veil that muffled sounds and hid forms. A fleeting shadow darted toward Regent Street, and we gave chase, our footsteps echoing on the cobblestones. Holmes, with his uncanny sense of direction, led the way, his great coat billowing like a cape. The pursuit wound through London's underbelly, narrow alleys reeking of refuse and despair, past gin shops where bleary-eyed patrons stumbled, and into the labyrinthine warrens of the East End. Our quarry was fleet, vanishing around corners only to reappear as a silhouette against a distant gas lamp. "Holmes, he's heading for the docks," I panted, my lungs burning from the exertion. "Indeed," Holmes replied, unflagging. "Likely to a hideout or rendezvous. We must not lose him." A sudden turn brought us to a derelict warehouse along the Thames, its doors hanging askew. The intruder slipped inside, and we followed cautiously, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and river muck. Inside, moonlight filtered through broken windows, illuminating crates and rusted machinery. A scuffle erupted from the shadows, a grunt, then silence. Holmes motioned for quiet, and we advanced, my revolver at the ready. Rounding a stack of barrels, we found the intruder sprawled unconscious, a blow to the head evident from a nearby iron bar. Before we could investigate, a low voice echoed from the darkness. "Mr. Holmes, you tread dangerous ground." We spun to face a cloaked figure, emerging from the gloom, his face hidden by a hood, but his posture bespoke authority. In his hand he held a peculiar device, a small lantern emitting a steady, unnatural glow, reminiscent of the molten core's chamber. "Who are you?" Holmes demanded, his eyes fixed on the lantern. "A guardian of secrets," the man replied, his voice cultured yet menacing. "The Order of the Eternal Flame does not tolerate interlopers. Hargrove betrayed us. His fate was sealed. Yours need not be. Return the prototype and walk away." Holmes' laugh was sharp. "Betrayed, or outshone. Your order covets his invention, yet lacks the genius to replicate it. This intrusion tonight, was it to retrieve or destroy?" The figure tensed, the lantern's glow intensifying. "You know nothing of our purpose. The primal fire is not for the masses. It burns those unworthy." He raised the device, and a wave of heat emanated, forcing us back. I fired a warning shot, the bullet ricocheting off a beam. The figure recoiled, dropping the lantern, which shattered in a burst of sparks. In the chaos, he fled through a side door, vanishing into the fog-shrouded docks. Holmes knelt by the unconscious intruder, searching his pockets. A hired thug, no doubt. But this, he held up a medallion, engraved with a flame encircled by arcane symbols. The Order, Sit's insignia. We have confirmation, Watson. The game deepens. As we dragged the intruder to the nearest police station, leaving him in Lestrade's bewildered custody, I felt the noose of danger tightening. The attempt on Holmes's life, or our rooms, had failed, but the Order's reach was clear. Dawn broke as we returned to Baker Street, the city awakening oblivious to the shadows we pursued. Holmes, invigorated by the chase, turned to me with a grim smile. "Rest while you can, Watson. Tomorrow we delve into the alchemist's legacy, and I suspect the flames will burn brighter yet." Chapter 8. The Alchemist's Legacy. The first light of dawn filtered through the curtains of 221B Baker Street, casting a pale glow over the disarray left by the nighttime intrusion. Shards of glass from the shattered window glittered on the floor, and the air still carried the faint scent of river dampness from our chase to the docks. Sherlock Holmes, undeterred by the chaos, sat at the table with Elias Hargrove's diary spread before him, his magnifying glass hovering over the faded pages. I had managed only a few hours of restless sleep, haunted by visions of cloaked figures and unnatural flames, but Holmes appeared invigorated, his keen mind fueled by the adrenaline of pursuit. "Watson, join me," he called as I descended the stairs, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "The diary yields its secrets slowly, but they are profound." Hargrove was no casual dabbler in alchemy. He was initiated into the Order of the Eternal Flame during his university days, a society tracing its roots to the medieval alchemists who sought the philosopher's stone. I poured myself a cup of strong coffee from the pot Mrs. Hudson had thoughtfully prepared and took a seat beside him. The diary's pages were filled with Hargrove's precise handwriting, interspersed with sketches of esoteric symbols and chemical formulas. The philosopher's stone, transmuting lead to gold? Surely that's myth, Holmes. "Myth rooted in science, Watson," he replied, his finger tracing a passage. "Hargrove believed the stone was a metaphor for harnessing atomic energies, a precursor to modern physics. Listen, the Order taught me the primal fire, a force to melt matter and reform it. But their leaders grew covetous, demanding I share my molten core for their rituals. I refused, fearing its misuse. This explains the betrayal he mentioned." I nodded, the pieces beginning to align. So the Order killed him to claim the prototype. But why the molten method? A warning, perhaps? Precisely, a signature execution, echoing their alchemical obsessions. The iridescent powder we found is likely their elixir of dissolution, a compound that induces internal combustion. Hargrove must have ingested it unwittingly, perhaps in his tea or a meal. Holmes closed the diary and rose, pacing the room with restless energy. "We must learn more about this Order. Their insignia, the flame within a circle, I've seen it before in esoteric libraries." Before I could suggest a course of action, a knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a telegram. "From Inspector Lestrade, sir. Urgent." Holmes snatched it, reading aloud. "Second molten victim at Hargrove Foundry, identified as Samuel Briggs, foreman. No witnesses. Prototype residue found on scene. Need your expertise. Lestrade." "Sect." "The plot thickens," I said, grabbing my coat. "To the foundry, then." "Indeed. But first, a detour. The British Museum houses a collection of alchemical manuscripts. We may find traces of the Order there." The cab ride to the museum was swift, the morning traffic parting before our urgency. The grand edifice of the British Museum loomed ahead, its columns a bastion of knowledge amid London's bustle. We were admitted to the reading room, where Holmes's reputation secured us access to restricted volumes. A bespectacled curator, Mr. Abernathy, led us to a dimly lit archive filled with ancient tomes bound in cracked leather. "The Order of the Eternal Flame," Abernathy said, his voice a whisper as if the name itself invoked peril. "A secretive fraternity, disbanded in the 18th century after accusations of heresy and arson. Rumors persist of underground revivals, blending occultism with emerging sciences." Holmes perused a yellowed manuscript, its pages illustrated with flaming crucibles and hooded figures. Here a ritual involving the melting of the impure, cite a punishment for traitors. The victim consumes a draught that ignites from within, symbolizing purification. I shuddered at the parallel to Hargrove's fate, barbaric, and their current leaders. Any names? Abernathy shook his head. "None documented, but whispers link them to influential circles, scientists, industrialists. One name recurs in footnotes: Professor Reginald Voss, a chemist expelled from the Royal Society for unethical experiments." "Voss," Holmes echoed, his eyes narrowing. "A potential lead. Watson, note that we shall investigate him anon." Armed with this legacy of alchemy, we hastened to the Hargrove Foundry in the industrial heart of East London. The air grew thick with soot and the clang of machinery as we approached the sprawling complex of brick buildings and smokestacks. Inspector Lestrade met us at the gate, his face grim under his bowler hat. "Holmes, Watson, glad you sir here. This one sits even odder than the first." Briggs was alone in the smelting room, door bolted from inside. "Found him this morning, reduced to slag, just like Hargrove." He led us to the scene, a cavernous room dominated by massive furnaces, their fires banked but still radiating heat. The chalk outline marked Briggs's position near a control panel, with a familiar dark stain marring the floor. Holmes knelt, examining the residue, the same powder, iridescent, crystalline. Briggs must have known something about the molten core. Lestrade scratched his head. He was loyal to Hargrove, oversaw the prototype's components. "Crane says Briggs was working late on inventory." "Crane, again," Holmes murmured. "Convenient. Watson, inspect the body. Or what remains." The remains were grotesque, a fused mass of organic and metallic matter, as if Briggs had been forged into the floor itself. "No external wounds," I reported. "Death instantaneous from overwhelming internal heat." Holmes rose, dusting his hands. "Lestrade, secure the foundry. Our killer is escalating, targeting those close to the secret. I suspect the Order sector's hand, guided by someone within Hargrove Industries." As we left the foundry, a worker approached hesitantly. "Sirs, Briggs mentioned a visitor yesterday, a cloaked man, asking about the Boss-Sitz invention." Briggs sent him away, but looked shaken. Holmes's interest piqued. "Description: tall, bearded, with a medallion round his neck, a flame symbol." "The Order," I whispered. Holmes nodded, his mind already plotting the next move. Back in the cab, en route to Baker Street, Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers. "The alchemist Sitz's legacy is one of fire and deceit. Watson, Professor Voss may hold the key to unlocking it. Tomorrow we confront him, but tonight, vigilance. The shadows grow longer, and our foes bolder." As the sun set over the Thames, painting the water in hues of molten gold, I felt the weight of ancient secrets pressing upon us. The Order's legacy was alive, burning through modern London, and only Holmes's brilliance could quench its deadly flame before it consumed us all. Chapter 9. False Leads and Forgeries. The fog that perpetually cloaked London seemed to mirror the obfuscation surrounding our case as Sherlock Holmes, and I set out for Professor Reginald Voss's residence in Bloomsbury. The revelations from the British Museum and the Hargrove Foundry had painted a vivid picture of an ancient order wielding modern perils, but Holmes's expression was one of cautious skepticism. "Legacies are often forged, Watson," he remarked, as our cab navigated the crowded streets. "We must discern the genuine from the counterfeit." Professor Voss's home was a modest townhouse, its facade unassuming amid the scholarly environs of the university district. We were admitted by a stern housekeeper into a study crammed with bookshelves groaning under the weight of arcane volumes and chemical apparatus. Voss himself was a gaunt man in his 60s, with a wild mane of white hair and eyes that burned with an intensity befitting an alchemist. He regarded us warily from behind a cluttered desk, a faint scent of sulphur lingering in the air. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice raspy, as if scorched by years of inhaling fumes. "To what do I owe this intrusion? My work is delicate, and interruptions are unwelcome." Holmes seated himself without invitation, his gaze sweeping the room. "Your expulsion from the Royal Society for Unethical Experiments. Elaborate, Professor." Voss's lips thinned. "Ancient history. I pursued truths others feared. Transmutation. Energy from ether. They branded me a charlatan." "What of it?" "The Order of the Eternal Flame," Holmes said bluntly. "You are linked to it in manuscripts. Elias Hargrove was a member, and his death bears the hallmarks of their rituals." Voss leaned back, steepling his fingers. "The Order. A defunct myth, Mr. Holmes. If Hargrove dabbled in such follies, it was his undoing. I knew of him. Brilliant, but naive. His molten core intrigued me, but we never collaborated." I noted Voss's evasion, but Holmes pressed on. "A cloaked man with your society's insignia visited the foundry before Samuel Briggs's death. Describe your whereabouts yesterday." Voss chuckled dryly. "Here, in my study, alone. My housekeeper can vouch, though she's half deaf." "You suspect me of these molten murders? Preposterous. My interests are theoretical, not homicidal." Holmes' eyes narrowed, spotting a medallion half hidden under papers on the desk, the flame within a circle. "Theoretical, yet you bear their symbol." Voss snatched it up, his composure cracking. "A curio, nothing more. Collected from antiquarian shops. If the Order exists, they shun me. I was never initiated, only studied their texts." We left Voss's home with more questions than answers, his denials ringing hollow. Holmes was silent during the cab ride back to Baker Street, his mind dissecting the encounter. "A forgery, Watson," he said at last. "Voss lies, but not as our primary culprit. His medallion was too conveniently visible, a plant, perhaps, to divert us." Upon returning, a telegram from Inspector Lestrade awaited. "Arrest made in Hargrove case. Victor Crane confessed to forgery of company documents. Motive for murder. Come to Scotland Yard." The yard buzzed with activity, as Lestrade led us to an interrogation room where Victor Crane sat shackled, his polished facade shattered, sweat beading on his brow. "Holmes," he said desperately, "it's not what it seems. I forged ledgers to hide financial discrepancies. Hargrove was siphoning funds for his device, bankrupting us. But murder? Never." Lestrade nodded. Found the forgeries in his office. Crane had means to poison Hargrove, access to the manor, knowledge of his habits. Holmes examined the forged documents, his magnifying glass revealing inconsistencies. Crude work, Mr. Crane. The ink is fresh, the handwriting a poor imitation. These were planted to incriminate you. Crane's eyes widened. Planted? By whom? By the true perpetrator, Holmes replied. Someone eager to provide a false lead. Tell me, did you notice anything unusual in Hargrove's behavior before his death? Crane hesitated. He received anonymous letters, threats, warnings about the order. He burned them. But I glimpsed one. The flame consumes the betrayer. Another piece slotted into place. Back at Baker Street, Holmes paced furiously. False leads abound, Watson. Voss's medallion, Crane's forgeries, all diversions. The order plants them to obscure their trail, but they err in overcomplication. I pondered aloud. What of Thomas Hargrove? His resentment, his hesitance, could he be involved? Possible, but unlikely. His grief seems genuine. No, the key lies in the prototype. Let's examine it anew. Holmes retrieved the miniature device, activating it with a twist of a valve. The glass chamber glowed faintly, a harmless demonstration of its energy. But as he adjusted a setting, a hidden compartment sprang open, revealing a folded note in Hargrove's hand. If I perish, seek the Foundry's hidden vault. The true secret lies there. A clue from the grave, I exclaimed. Holmes' smile was triumphant. Indeed, to the Foundry, Watson, under cover of night. But beware, the Order watches. As evening fell, we slipped into the Hargrove Foundry, evading patrols with Holmes' masterful stealth. The smelting room was eerily silent, the furnaces cold. Following Hargrove's note, Holmes located a concealed panel behind a control board, revealing a vault. Inside, blueprints, samples of the powder and a ledger naming Order members, including Dr. Margaret Poole. Poole, I whispered. The chemist. She provided the compounds. Holmes nodded. A forgery debunked. Her frustration was feigned. She infiltrated to steal the formula. But as we pocketed the evidence, a shadow detached from the wall, a cloaked figure wielding a vial of glowing liquid. You meddle in forbidden fires, he hissed, hurling the vial. Holmes dodged, the liquid splashing and igniting a crate in a burst of heatless flame that melted wood to slag. We pursued the assailant through the Foundry's maze, but he vanished into the night, leaving only a dropped medallion, identical to Voss's. Another false lead, I panted. No, Watson, a confirmation. The net tightens. Tomorrow we confront Poole and unravel this web of forgeries. The moon hung low as we departed, the Foundry's smokestack silhouetted against the sky. False leads had been debunked, but the true culprit lurked closer, their deceptions crumbling under Holmes's relentless logic. The molten mystery burned hotter, promising a confrontation that would forge truth from the ashes of deceit. Chapter 10. The Foundry Confrontation. The Hargrove Foundry stood like a blackened cathedral against the London night, its smokestacks clawing at a moonless sky. Sherlock Holmes and I moved silently through the shadows, our breath visible in the chill air, the ledger and blueprints from the hidden vault tucked securely in Holmes's satchel. The revelation of Dr. Margaret Poole's name among the Order of the Eternal Flame had shifted the puzzle's pieces, and Holmes's determination to confront her was palpable. Yet the memory of the cloaked assailant's attack lingered, a warning that our quarry was both cunning and dangerous. "We must tread carefully, Watson," Holmes whispered as we approached the foundry sept's rear entrance, a rusted gate barely visible in the gloom. Poole Sept's involvement suggests a deeper conspiracy within Hargrove Industries. The foundry is their crucible, literal and figurative. I gripped my revolver, its weight a reassuring anchor. If Poole is here, she sits'll not catch us unawares again. Holmes' faint smile betrayed his approval. With a deft twist, he picked the gate's lock, and we slipped into the foundry's labyrinth of machinery and shadows. The air was thick with the acrid tang of molten metal, though the furnaces stood cold, their fires banked for the night. Our footsteps echoed softly on the concrete floor, each sound amplified by the cavernous space. Holmes led the way to the smelting room where Samuel Briggs had met his molten fate. The chalk outline remained, a grim reminder of the Order's deadly craft. But Holmes's attention was drawn to a control panel near the main furnace, its dials and levers gleaming faintly in the dim light of our lantern. Hargrove's note mentioned a vault, he murmured, running his fingers along the panel's edge. But this is more than a hiding place, it's a staging ground. Before I could ask what he meant, a low hum vibrated through the floor, followed by a faint glow emanating from a concealed hatch beneath the panel. Holmes pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "A sub-level," he said, his voice laced with anticipation. "The Order's lair, perhaps." We descended cautiously, the air growing warmer and heavier with each step. The passage opened into a subterranean chamber, its walls lined with alchemical symbols etched in glowing phosphorescent paint. At the center stood a larger version of the molten core prototype, its glass chamber pulsing with an eerie, heatless light. Shelves held vials of iridescent powder, identical to that found in Hargrove's workshop, and a table bore blueprints marked with cryptic annotations. Holmes examined a vial, his expression grim. "This is their arsenal, Watson. The elixir of dissolution, refined and stockpiled. Enough to melt an army." I shuddered, imagining the devastation such a weapon could unleash. But why here? Why risk exposure in the foundry? "Proximity to resources," Holmes replied, scanning the blueprints. "Hargrove Sept's furnaces provided the raw materials for their compounds. Poole must have overseen production, posing as a loyal consultant." A sudden clatter from above snapped us to attention. Footsteps echoed, deliberate and unhurried, descending the staircase. Holmes doused our lantern, and we retreated behind a stack of crates, my revolver at the ready. A figure emerged into the chamber, illuminated by the prototype's glow. Dr. Margaret Poole, her prim demeanor replaced by a steely resolve. She carried a satchel, and her movements were those of someone accustomed to this hidden sanctum. She approached the prototype, adjusting its valves with practiced ease. The chamber's light intensified, casting her face in a spectral glow. "Elias was a fool," she muttered, seemingly to herself. "His vision was too narrow, energy for the masses, when the primal fire could reshape empires. It's Prowl's Maul." Holmes stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "A fine ambition, Dr. Poole, but murder is a poor foundation for empire." Poole whirled, her hand darting to her satchel, but Holmes Sept's steady gaze halted her. "Do not attempt it, madam. My companion Sept's aim is impeccable, and I Sept's no patience for further deceptions." Her eyes narrowed, calculating. "You step a meddled too far, Holmes. The Order is eternal, its purpose beyond your comprehension. Hargrove betrayed us, and Briggs saw too much. Their deaths were necessary." "Necessary?" I exclaimed, stepping forward, revolver leveled. You melted men alive for your alchemy. Poolsip's lips curled in a sneer. Alchemy? This is science, Doctor. Science that will burn away the old order. The molten core is merely the beginning. Holmes advanced, his tone icy, and the cloaked figure. Your accomplice, or another pawn. Poole hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing her face. You shall not find him. He moves in shadows. You cannot pierce. Before Holmes could press further, a deafening clang resounded above, followed by shouts. Police! A voice bellowed. Lestrade, no doubt, alerted by our earlier message. Poole seized the moment, hurling a vial at the prototype. It shattered, releasing a burst of heatless flame that consumed the blueprints in a flash of molten light. Stop her! Holmes shouted, lunging forward. I fired a warning shot, but Poole was swift, darting up the staircase as the chamber filled with acrid smoke. We pursued, emerging into the smelting room to find Lestrade and his men storming the foundry, lanterns swinging wildly. She's escaping, I cried, pointing to Poole's retreating figure as she vanished through a side door. Holmes and I gave chase, weaving through the maze of machinery, but the fog outside swallowed her trail. We returned to Lestrade, breathless and frustrated. She sits, slipped us, Holmes. I panted, but we have her confession. Indeed, Holmes said, his eyes gleaming despite the setback, and evidence enough, the vials, the prototype septs remains. But Poole is not the mastermind. Her hesitation betrayed a superior, the true architect of this molten terror. Lestrade, red-faced, joined us. We secured the chamber, Holmes. Enough strange powders and gadgets to keep the yard busy for weeks. But what sits this about a mastermind? Holmes waved a hand dismissively. A matter for tomorrow, Lestrade. For now, guard this foundry. The order sits reach extends further than we suspected. As we left the foundry, the first rays of dawn broke through the fog, casting a pale light over the city. Poole's escape stung, but her words echoed in my mind. A shadowy leader, a grander scheme. Holmes' silence suggested he was already unraveling the next thread, and I knew our confrontation had merely stoked the flames of this deadly mystery, drawing us closer to a reckoning that would burn away the shadows of deceit. Chapter 11. Betrayal among Allies. The air in 221B Baker Street was heavy with the scent of tobacco and burnt chemicals as Sherlock Holmes and I sat by the fire, the events of the foundry confrontation still smouldering in our minds. Dawn had barely broken, yet Holmes was already at work, the recovered vials of iridescent powder arranged on the table alongside Hargrove's diary and the Order's medallion. His face was a mask of concentration, but I sensed a flicker of unease beneath his usual composure, an unease I shared, for Dr. Margaret Poole's escape and her cryptic reference to a hidden mastermind had cast a shadow over our progress. "Watson," Holmes said, breaking the silence, "we are close, yet perilously blind. Poole is a cog in a larger machine, and her flight confirms a higher authority. But another matter troubles me. Our allies may not be as steadfast as we presume." I frowned, setting down my coffee. Allies? You mean Lestrade? Or Mrs. Hargrove? Surely they sit her above suspicion. Holmes' eyes glinted with that familiar spark of deduction. Trust is a luxury we cannot afford. Recall Thomas Hargrove's hesitance, his nervous demeanor, and Mrs. Hargrove. She withheld the diary's existence initially, claiming ignorance. Even Lestrade, with his bumbling efficiency, may unwittingly obscure A vital clue. We must scrutinize those closest to us. Before I could protest, a sharp rap at the door announced Mrs. Hudson, bearing a letter, delivered by hand, Mr. Holmes, not 10 minutes ago. The boy who brought it ran off without a word. Holmes tore open the envelope, his brow furrowing as he read. Unsigned, but the hand is educated, the paper costly. Listen, Thu Holmes, you chase shadows while the flame grows. Seek the manor sits, east wing, 3rd floor, tonight. A trap? I asked, my hand instinctively moving to my revolver. Likely, Holmes replied, folding the note. But traps reveal as much as they conceal. We shall oblige, Watson, but with utmost caution. That evening, under a sky bruised with storm clouds, we returned to Hargrove Manor. The fog had lifted, leaving a crisp clarity that made every sound, the crunch of gravel, the distant hoot of an owl, unnervingly sharp. Mrs. Hargrove greeted us, her face pale but composed. Holmes, I wasn't expecting you. Have you news of Dr. Poole? Not yet, Holmes said smoothly, but we separately to pursue. May we inspect the east wing, 3rd floor? Her eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. Of course, it sits largely unused. Storage rooms. Elias sits, old study. I'd said fetch the keys. As she departed, Holmes whispered, "Watch her, Watson." Her reaction was too quick, too controlled. We ascended to the 3rd floor, the air growing musty as we navigated a corridor lined with dusty portraits and locked doors. Holmes's lantern cast flickering shadows, and I kept my revolver ready, the memory of the foundry's assailant fresh in my mind. At the 3rd door, marked by a faint scorch mark on the frame, Holmes paused. "This," he said, testing the handle. It was unlocked. Inside was a small study, its shelves crammed with alchemical texts and scientific journals. A desk held a single object, a brass key, engraved with the Order's flame insignia. Holmes pocketed it, his expression darkening. Planted, no doubt. Our anonymous correspondent is orchestrating a performance. A soft creak from the corridor snapped us to attention. I turned, revolver raised as a figure emerged, Thomas Hargrove, his face ashen, hands trembling. "Mr. Holmes, I followed you. I heard you mention the East Wing. I had to know." Holmes' gaze was piercing. "Know what, Mr. Hargrove? That you sit's been less than forthcoming. Your father Sit's diary mentions a confidant in the Order. Someone close. Speak, or I shall assume the worst." Thomas collapsed into a chair, his voice breaking. I didn't want to believe it. Father told me, months ago, he suspected Mother Mrs. Hargrove was spying for the Order. She joined them in her youth, before they married, but swore she'd left. He found letters, hidden in her bureau, bearing their seal. I thought he was paranoid, but after his death, I stared, stunned. Mrs. Hargrove, a traitor? Holmes' expression remained impassive. Evidence, Thomas. Where are these letters? In her room, locked in a rosewood box. I couldn't bring myself to look, but I saw her slip one into her pocket yesterday, after you left. Holmes nodded, as if a puzzle piece had slotted into place. "Watson, we must confront her, discreetly. Thomas, remain here. If you stir lying, I still know." We descended to the drawing room, where Mrs. Hargrove awaited, her composure faltering, as Holmes fixed her with his unrelenting stare. "Mrs. Hargrove, a word about your past. The Order of the Eternal Flame. When did you last communicate with them?" Her hand flew to her throat, a gesture of guilt or fear. I left them years ago, before I met Elias. They were fanatics, dangerous. Ein Sip had no contact since. Then explain this, Holmes said, producing the brass key. Found in the East Wing, as per an anonymous tip, likely from your order associates, hoping to shift blame. She paled, her voice barely a whisper. I swear, I don't know how that got there. I'd have been loyal to Elias, to this family. Holmes leaned closer, his voice low and cutting, then produced the letters. Thomas claims you hid. Refusal will confirm your complicity. Tears welled in her eyes as she rose, leading us to her bedroom. From a rosewood box, she extracted a bundle of letters, their wax seals bearing the flame insignia. Holmes scanned them, his expression grim. Correspondence with a figure known as the Torchbearer, urging you to secure the molten cores formula. You withheld this, endangering us all. I was afraid, she sobbed. They threatened Thomas if I didn't comply. I burned most of their letters, but these I kept to protect us. Holmes' gaze softened, but only slightly. Fear is no excuse for silence. Watson, secure these letters. They name names, Professor Voss among others, confirming his involvement. As we prepared to leave, a crash echoed from the East Wing. Rushing back, we found Thomas sprawled on the floor, a gash on his temple, the room in disarray. Someone attacked me, he gasped, took the key. Holmes cursed under his breath. A rare lapse. The order moves swiftly. Watson, we been betrayed, not by Mrs. Hargrove, but by our own oversight. The Torchbearer orchestrates this chaos, and the key unlocks their next move. As we helped Thomas to his feet, the manor's silence felt oppressive, a prelude to a storm. Mrs. Hargrove's tears, Thomas's injury, the stolen key, all pointed to a mastermind, weaving a web of betrayal. Holmes' mind was already racing toward the next confrontation, and I braced myself for the fire that awaited, knowing our allies were as treacherous as our foes. Chapter 12. The penultimate deduction. The fire in the grate at 221B Baker Street burned low, casting flickering shadows across the room as Sherlock Holmes and I sat in the pre-dawn stillness. The events at Hargrove Manor, the stolen key, Mrs. Hargrove's reluctant confession, and Thomas's attack had left us on the precipice of revelation, yet the final piece of the puzzle eluded us. Holmes, his eyes glinting with relentless focus, spread the order's letters, the diary, and the recovered blueprints across the table, his mind weaving a tapestry from the threads of deceit and alchemy. "Watson," he said, his voice taut with anticipation, "we approach the crux. The Torchbearer, this shadowy orchestrator, has played a masterful game, but their hand is overextended. The key stolen from Thomas unlocks more than a vault. It unlocks their identity." I leaned forward, my notebook filled with frantic scribbles from the past days. "You suspect someone beyond Poole and Voss, then? But who?" We interrogated. "Every suspect, Crane, Thomas, even Mrs. Hargrove." Holmes' lips curled in a faint smile. The mark of a true mastermind is to hide in plain sight, manipulating others to bear the blame. Consider the evidence. Hargrove's murder, Briggs' death, the planted forgeries, the staged intrusions, all designed to distract us from the molten core's true purpose. The letters mention the Torchbearer's ambition to reshape empires, a goal too grand for a mere chemist like Poole or an outcast like Voss. He tapped a letter, its wax seal cracked but intact. This phrase, "flame consumes the betrayer," is not merely a threat but a philosophy. The Torchbearer believes themselves a purifier, wielding the primal fire to eliminate obstacles. Hargrove was the first, Briggs the second, and we, Watson, are next unless we act swiftly. I shivered, the weight of our peril settling heavily. The Foundry Sipt's vault mentioned a see-through secret, cittery. Could it be another device, or a formula? Holmes nodded, rising to pace the room. The blueprints suggest a secondary function of the molten core, a weaponized variant capable of delivering the elixir of dissolution remotely, perhaps as a vapor or pulse. The stolen key likely accesses its controls, hidden elsewhere in the foundry. We must return there tonight, but first, a deduction. He paused, his gaze distant, as if seeing through the fog of London itself. The suspect's motives are clear. Crane's greed, Thomas's resentment, Mrs. Hargrove's coerced complicity, Poole's ambition, Voss's obsession, yet none possess the audacity to orchestrate this scale of deception. The Torchbearer is someone with intimate knowledge of Hargrove's work, access to the manor, and the cunning to manipulate the Order's fanatics. A sudden realization struck me. Holmes, what of the shadowed figure Thomas saw and Mrs. Hargrove Sipt's mention of a watcher? Could it be the Torchbearer themselves, observing their pawns? Precisely, Holmes said, his voice sharp with triumph. And who better to watch unnoticed than one already trusted? Consider Victor Crane, not the forger, but the puppet master. His polished demeanor, his access to Hargrove's plans, his presence at every critical juncture. The forgeries were too clumsy to be his work, a deliberate misdirection to paint him as a lesser villain. I stared, incredulous. Crane. But he seemed shaken, out of his depth. A performance, Watson. Recall his quick recovery during our interrogation, his convenient alibi. He knew of the anonymous letters, yet never produced them, and the foundry worker Sit's description of the cloaked visitor, a bearded man, matches Crane Sipt's build, not Voss its. Holmes retrieved the miniature molten core prototype, its glass chamber catching the firelight. This device, a decoy of sorts, was meant to distract us from the true weapon. Crane, as Hargrove's partner, had access to its designs. He revived the Order, or infiltrated it, to harness their resources, using Poole as his enforcer and Voss as a scapegoat. I shook my head, grappling with the revelation. But the motive? Why kill Hargrove, his own partner? Power, Holmes said simply. The molten core's energy could revolutionize industry, but weaponized, it could dominate nations. Crane sought to control it alone, eliminating Hargrove to claim the invention, and the Order to secure its secrets. The molten deaths were a demonstration, a terrifying signature to cow rivals. A knock at the door interrupted us. Inspector Lestrade entered, his face flushed with urgency. Holmes, we Sip traced Poole. She Sip's holed up in a warehouse near the docks with armed men, likely Order members. We Sipped planning a raid tonight. Holmes' Sip's eyes gleamed. Excellent, Lestrade. But we have a prior engagement at the foundry. Join us there first. Bring your men. Crane is our true quarry, and I suspect he'll be there, activating the weapon. Lestrade gaped. Crane? He sits in custody for the forgeries. A ruse, Holmes said dismissively. He arranged his own arrest to deflect suspicion, knowing the evidence was flimsy. He Sits likely slipped your net already. Lestrade cursed, dispatching a constable to check the cells. As we prepared to depart, Holmes handed me the prototype. Keep this safe, Watson. It may yet serve as evidence or bait. Night fell as we arrived at the Hargrove foundry, its silhouette stark against a sky heavy with impending rain. Lestrade's men fanned out, securing the perimeter, while Holmes and I entered the smelting room. The air was thick with the metallic tang of molten iron, and a faint hum emanated from the hidden sublevel we'd discovered earlier. Holmes located the vault's concealed entrance, the stolen key fitting perfectly into a lock disguised as a furnace gauge. The door swung open, revealing a chamber aglow with a massive molten core variant, its glass chamber pulsating with a malevolent light. At its controls stood Victor Crane, his face illuminated by the eerie glow, his hands steady as he adjusted levers. "Holmes," he said without turning, his voice calm but laced with menace. "You stop, predictable, but too late. The weapon is primed, and London will witness its power." Holmes stepped forward, undaunted. "A fine performance, Crane, but your script falters. The order, the forgeries, the molten deaths, all your machinations. Surrender, and we may yet save you from the gallows." Crane laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Surrender. The primal fire is mine to wield. Step closer, and you sit'll burn like Hargrove." I raised my revolver, but Holmes signaled restraint. "Watson, the device, its controls are unstable. One wrong move, and we all perish." As Crane turned to activate the weapon, a shout from Lestrade's men echoed outside. Poole's warehouse raid had flushed out her accomplices, who now converged on the foundry. The chamber trembled, the molten core humming ominously. Hum's deduction had brought us to the brink, but Crane's hand hovered over the final lever, and I knew the true resolution lay in the fiery confrontation to come. Chapter 13. The Molten Twist and Resolution. Chapter 13. The Molten Twist and Resolution. The subterranean chamber beneath the Hargrove foundry pulsed with a malevolent energy, the weaponized molten core's glass chamber casting a searing glow across Victor Crane's face. His hand hovered over the final lever, his eyes gleaming with a fanatic's zeal. Sherlock Holmes stood resolute, his voice cutting through the hum of the device. "Crane, your ambition ends here. The order is in disarray, Poole is captured, and your weapon will not see the light of day." Crane's laugh was a jagged edge of defiance. "You underestimate the primal fire, Holmes. His device will burn away the old world, and I shall forge the new. Step back, or join Hargrove in oblivion." I gripped my revolver, my heart pounding as Inspector Lestrade's men shouted from above, their boots thundering as they secured the foundry against the order's remnants. The air grew stifling, the heatless light of the molten core seeming to press against my skin. Holmes, however, remained calm, his mind a razor slicing through Crane's bravado. "Your plan is flawed," Holmes said, stepping closer, his gaze locked on Crane's. "The elixir of dissolution, your so-called primal fire, it's unstable." Hargrove's notes warned of catastrophic feedback. "If the device is improperly calibrated, you're no alchemist, Crane, merely a thief of genius." Crane's hand faltered, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "Lies. I perfected Hargrove-Sitt's design." "Did you?" Holmes countered, producing the miniature prototype from his satchel. "This, the true heart of Hargrove-Sitt's work, contains a fail-safe, a counter-compound to neutralize the elixir." Hargrove anticipated betrayal. I glanced at the prototype, recalling the iridescent powder within. Holmes' deduction was a gamble, but his confidence was unshakable. Crane Sipst's eyes darted to the device, his composure cracking. A failsafe. Impossible. Holmes seized the moment, tossing the prototype toward the molten core's controls. It struck a valve, releasing a burst of shimmering mist. The counter compound, the weapon's glow flickered, its hum faltering as the chamber dimmed. Crane roared, lunging for the lever, but I fired a shot, grazing his arm. He stumbled, clutching the wound, as Lestrade's men stormed the chamber, restraining him. But the true twist was yet to come. As the device powered down, a hidden panel slid open, revealing a compartment with a single letter in Hargrove's hand. Holmes snatched it, reading aloud, "To my betrayer, if you read this, know I foresaw your treachery. The molten core's true secret is not destruction, but creation, a stable energy source for humanity. The elixir was a decoy, its deadly form a trap for the Order. I die to protect this truth. I stared, stunned. Hargrove staged his own death. Not staged, Holmes corrected, his voice tinged with admiration. He knew the Order would strike, so he laced his tea with a diluted elixir, ensuring a controlled death to expose their plot. The prototype's failsafe was his legacy, a means to neutralize the weapon and reveal the true molten core hidden elsewhere. Crane, now shackled, spat venomously. He fooled us all. The Order believed him a traitor, but he played us for fools. Lestrade, bewildered, shook his head. So Hargrove Sit's death was a sacrifice to stop this madness. Precisely, Holmes said, pocketing the letter. He entrusted the stable molten core to a loyal ally, likely Thomas, who knew more than he let on. We still find it in the Manor Sepper's vaults, safe from the Order Sepper's grasp. As Crane was led away, the foundry fell silent, the weaponized device inert. We returned to Hargrove Manor, where Thomas, recovered from his injury, confirmed Holmes's theory. In a hidden safe, we found the true molten core, a compact, stable reactor, its glow gentle and promising. Hargrove wept, her relief palpable, as Thomas vowed to honor his father's vision for a better world. Back at Baker Street, as dawn painted the sky, Holmes lit his pipe, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. A case of fire and sacrifice, Watson. Hargrove Sit's genius outshone his enemies, and his legacy endures. I nodded, penning the final notes in my journal. A fitting end, Holmes. The Order is dismantled, Crane and Poole face justice, and the molten core will light the future, not burn it. Holmes exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes distant. For now, Watson. But the embers of ambition never truly die. We shall remain vigilant. The molten mystery has burned to its thrilling close, with Sherlock Holmes unraveling a web of alchemy and betrayal to save London from a fiery fate. Where are you unraveling this tale? Under the gaslights of a bustling city, a quiet village nook, or a far-flung corner of the globe? Drop your location in the comments and don't miss the next adventure. Subscribe now to join Holmes and Watson as they chase shadows and spark new legends.